Thank you for joining this information webinar on writing a strong proposal for a AAACN Research, EBP, or QI grant. I am Trina Moss, a member of the AAACN Research Committee. I am also a trained nurse scientist with more than 25 years of nursing experience.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome again. My name is Janae Hurlbut, and I've been involved in nursing education for over 30 years, and certainly during that time frame have been involved in various research projects. So again, welcome everyone.
The purpose of today's information session is to equip and prepare nurse investigators and other scientists with the tools and resources to prepare grant proposals. Today is about sharing best practices for creating strong research, EBP, and QI proposals that meet the funding organization's mission and priorities with the goal of proposal acceptance and funding. I'll start the discussion on best practices for strong research proposals and then hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Janae, to share best practices for strong EBP and QI proposals. We will have time for Q&A at the end, so be sure to jot down any questions along the way or put them in the chat for us to answer later. So, what is the mission? First, when we advance nursing science and scholarship, the mission is to contribute to the body of empirical knowledge that is the foundation of our specialty, ambulatory care nursing. To do this, often we pursue grant funding opportunities to help support and implement our projects. It starts with a compelling, logical, and substantiated proposal that meets the funding priorities of AAACN, Advanced Nursing Science and Ambulatory Care Nursing. The proposal is a well-substantiated document that identifies an important question or hypothesis, a feasible plan to test the question or hypothesis, a qualified investigator team, and an adequate environment to carry out the study. It must tell a clear, concise, cohesive, and complete story throughout that builds and provides continuity of the study purpose. The second mission is to describe how you are uniquely qualified to complete the research study. So you may want to consider your answers to the following when drafting your personal statement. Is the principal investigator or PI a member of AAACN? Does the PI or RN team member have a minimum of a master's degree? Is the PI or RN team member PhD or DNP prepared? Or is the PI or RN team member a PhD or DNP candidate? How does this study demonstrate a commitment to advance the science of ambulatory care nursing? And finally, please describe how your clinical and leadership background and expertise are applicable to the topic. Well, I think I went too far. I apologize. Okay. So first, we want to spend a few minutes discussing AAACN's top ambulatory care nursing priorities and focus of interest. First, we have the ambulatory person-centered care, which is patient wellness, prevention, nurse-patient communication, health literacy, patient adherence, and the rest identified here. And then we also have those identified in telehealth, which are nurse advice line services, telephone triage, and remote monitoring. AAACN NSI report is expected at any time, so please stay tuned for its release. We also have specialty population health as another focus area of interest. particularly concerning these vulnerable populations. Finally, AAACN priorities focus on workplace development from pre-licensure through the career trajectory with professional development and leadership challenges and opportunities in ambulatory settings. Pay particular attention to political advocacy. This priority focuses on opportunities for AAACN to review and advocate for legislative initiatives related to nursing practice in ambulatory care settings around the country. For more information on this, please review AAACN's website in the About section and review advocacy initiatives. So what are the steps for a well-substantiated research proposal? Let's get into it. First, you want to follow all instructions by AAACN related to requests for proposals, the application process, and the budget for the study. I know this sounds overly simplistic, yet it is so important to get this first step. Missing any part of this may disqualify you from grant funding. These links provide explicit instructions in detail about research grant criteria, AAACN research priorities, and research proposal requirements. Let's talk about research proposals. Remember, I mentioned the importance of reading the instructions carefully. Funding organizations, conferences, and peer-reviewed publications have very specific requirements for submission, including word limits, deadlines, and formatting of font size, type, and spacing. AAACN research proposals have the following requirements: Times New Roman, 12-point size, double-spaced, half-inch margins, abstract of 250 words or less, and not to exceed 12 pages for the background through methodology. Another important point to remember is to know your audience. The grant reviewers are individuals who typically volunteer to serve as abstract and grant reviewers. AAACN grant review panel consists of nurses from a variety of ambulatory care environments and academic settings. They must be PhD, DNS or DNP prepared, or master's prepared APRNs with research and/or EBP experience, including previous experience with grant writing and manuscript development. Your abstract is a description of your study that must follow the 4 C's previously mentioned: clear, concise, cohesive, and complete. I'll throw in the 5th C here. It must showcase a compelling story of the most important element of your research in a way that generates interest and excitement. Think of it as the advertisement or elevator pitch for your research, providing a high-level focus on these 5 areas conveyed in 250 words or less. Now, I'll get a little bit more into detail of each of the proposal components. This section provides justification for the proposed study and creates context by providing background information of the project, revealing how the proposal builds on previous work, and identifies gaps in previous knowledge. Be sure to demonstrate how the background directly links with the project and the identified research priorities mentioned. The literature review findings help to identify the gaps in previous knowledge and build a case for the importance of your study. So if the literature includes a study that you are replicating as the basis of your research, be sure to highlight it in your review. The background and significance is the area where you will want to include a detailed description of preliminary or pilot studies that are linked to your proposal. In addition to the questions shown here, also consider some answers to the following when drafting content for your background and significance. Is the significance or importance of the work evident? Is it innovative? Does it contribute substantially to previous work in ambulatory care nursing? Is the need for the study in all aspects well justified? Ideally, you will want to show the natural progress from the description of the current state of knowledge to the gap that your proposal will fill. So consider this example closing sentence to bridge the connection. The proposed project will build on this previous work or address limitations in the previous work by ... and you can add the rest. This is the most important section of your proposal. You will want to spend most of your time and energy on conceptualizing and articulating the key elements of your hypothesis and research question. Keep in mind, your hypothesis is a restatement of your research question in a form that can be analyzed statistically for significance. Please consider getting input from colleagues, mentors, and your research team to refine this section. Consider these specific examples of a specific aims section that use strong verbs to convey a clear endpoint. For example, to examine the effectiveness of using an artificial intelligence intervention strategy in advanced directive screenings in ambulatory care procedural surgical settings. This aim involves the following sub-aims. 1, to determine time to emergency decision-making outcomes. And 2, to discover the direct healthcare costs of the AI strategy as compared with usual care. Also, you may want to consider your answers to the following when drafting content for the specific aims. Are the aims well-focused and fully conceptualized with a strong linkage back to the AAACN research priorities? Are the hypotheses clearly articulated? And do the aims appear balanced and not overly unrealistic or ambitious? Let's talk a little bit about theoretical and philosophical or conceptual framework. In quantitative research, the theoretical framework provides a brief explanation of a theory or the parts of a theory used to guide the study. The researcher is building on previous knowledge but has identified a gap in knowledge. And then in qualitative research, it is based on different philosophical values and assumptions. And the value of this approach is placed on learning the unique and individual perspectives and perceptions in understanding meaning of a phenomena to those who have experienced it. No matter the approach, be sure to demonstrate strong clarity and relevance of the underlying framework used or the reasons you chose not to use a framework or philosophy. So again, consider your answers to the following when drafting content for your framework section. Is the research approach concise and well articulated? Is the approach appropriate for the study design and the research question? And is the purpose of the study to build on previous knowledge or understand meaning? This section may actually be the heart of your proposal. You should consider devoting about 40 to 50% of your page allowance for this section. So here are some important tips to consider when writing this section. You want to be sure to describe the study design in detail. Carefully describe and justify your study sample with specific details of inclusion and exclusion criteria. You may want to think DIB here and be sure to address in detail any biases and assure that they will not invalidate the study. Provide a comprehensive description of the intervention strategy and how it will be implemented. Make sure you include plans for monitoring adherence, as well as describe in sufficient detail so that the strategies might be replicated in other settings, and be sure to include necessary training required and proficiency for the intervention. Again, you may want to consider your answers to the following when drafting content for the section of methodology. Are inclusion and exclusion criteria fully described and well justified? Is availability of adequate numbers of participants from the sampling frame assured? And is the outcome adequately described, defined, and specified? The data analysis plan is a detailed description of the data management procedures, the analytic approach, and sample size, as well as power calculations. So you will want to discuss how you will handle missing data and attrition. Also discuss alternate strategies for statistical methods and tell why you decided on the chosen approach. A thorough description of informed consent, identifying disclosure, comprehension, competence, and voluntary agreement must be explained and documented. You must address privacy, confidentiality, and fair selection concerns in detail. The procedures to protect human subjects and the plan to seek IRB approval is very well described, and the lack of not including IRB approval must be well justified. Also, your timeline helps you plan and organize your project. It identifies project deadlines and target dates and helps you set realistic goals, prioritize your tasks, and communicate expectations and progress, as well as accomplish your outcomes. Your timeline should demonstrate strong feasibility and clear clarity in a timeline table format. And now we are at the study summary and dissemination plan. The study summary provides a realistic assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of the proposal. You will want to state how you will address limitations to assure that the limitations do not invalidate results, and make sure that your dissemination plan addresses the purpose of your outreach, the audience of your outreach, the message that you're going to share, your method of sharing the message, the timing for your outreach, and the process for evaluating the success of the dissemination effort. Finally, the budget provides the sponsor, AAACN, with an accurate assessment of all cost items and amounts deemed necessary and reasonable to carry out your study. Here are some important tips to consider when creating your research budget. Be realistic. Don't overinflate the budget or underfund it in the hopes it will be funded. Be sure to be detailed and specific, providing clear justification for the calculations used to arrive at the dollar figure for each item in the category. If you're planning a budget for dual funding or multiple sponsors, clearly separate the budget on AAACN's budget form shown here to show how expenditures are divided between each sponsor. And you also want to make sure you group costs and expenses into the categories shown on the budget form and justify every item listed in the budget, linking costs to your research objectives wherever possible. Finally, again, you want to consider your answers to the following when completing the budget form. Will the proposed budget realistically fund the study from beginning to dissemination? Does it demonstrate appropriate justification for each line item and category? And were key stakeholders like the CFO and the research team included in identifying costs and providing justification? Now, I'll hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Herbert.
All right, thank you, everyone. And I will be talking about evidence-based practice and QI proposals. Just for a little grounding, some basic definitions of evidence-based and QI. Remember that as evidence-based practice is a systematic approach that integrates the review and appraisal of the best available evidence combined with clinical expertise and patient population circumstances to ultimately guide delivery of care. Whereas QI is a systematic data guide activities to promote, evaluate, and improve quality and safety outcomes of health services and care processes. So overall, the purpose of an evidence-based practice project is the integration of evidence into practice, and the purpose of a QI project is to improve or innovate in healthcare outcomes or workflow processes. In terms of the abstract, again, we had great information, but to recap some important concepts, it should be 250 words maximum. And use structured headings. I know as a reviewer myself, it's frustrating if I have to thumb through proposals trying to find the evidence. So be very clear with your headings. Remember that the abstract is the first thing the funding agency will read, and a well-written abstract is what makes a good grant proposal stand out. It is important that the abstract is concise and yet provides a comprehensive summary of the proposals, highlighting all important aspects of the initiative. Clearly address the problem, the need for the research on the area or the background, the model, and methods utilized. Also address the aim and the purpose, the proposed change, and the uniqueness of the initiative. Typically, writing the abstract is usually one of the last portions or parts of the proposal you will write. And a good reason to do this is to make sure that any changes that evolve while writing the proposal is reflected in the abstract. In terms of the background and problem, of course, you want to explain how the problem was identified. So, for example, you may target one of AAACN's care priorities, such as telehealth and specifically maybe telephone triage. Take sufficient time to draft the summary or background for the reviewer. The background is important for the reviewer to grasp the need of the proposal. The background should flow and highlight the relevant literature and policy or society needs, and statements should be given that support the need for the practice change at a local, national, and even an international level. You also want to highlight the practice gap the proposal is addressing and ensure that this section is well referenced. Also provide background information related to baseline practice information that supports the need for the change or improvement. Critiques from reviewers for this section may include it did not justify the need for the initiative, that provided too much extraneous background information, or overstated the significance of the problem. In terms of evidence-based practice proposal, there are models that help establish strategies to determine the resources, the needs, identify barriers, facilitators, and overall guide the EBP process. Evidence-based practice models provide insight into the complexity of transforming evidence into clinical practice. They also allow organizations to determine their readiness, willingness, and potential outcomes for the systems. I've listed some of the more common models on the slide, the Iowa, the STAR model, and Johns Hopkins. There are others you can certainly research and use. A couple other examples include Academic Center for Evidence-Based Practice, also known as ACE, and the Stettler model. In terms of the QI proposal, again, you want to describe the model that was utilized. The three most common QI methodologies used in healthcare are the Plan, Do, Study, also known as the PDSA, and the Six Sigma and Lean strategies. And really, the choice of the methodology depends on the nature of the improvement project. Explain your rationale for the model that you chose. And I did find several great references for these models for both EBP and QI within the literature if you need further information on these. So for example, the lean model, this was described when a system is insufficient, wasteful, or has poor workflow. Lean is based on the Toyota production system and aims to improve quality, productivity by eliminating waste, unevenness, or overburden. The PDSA model was described as a process that is utilized when there needs something to be changed or a new one needs to be identified. And the PDSA is a cyclic process that can be used to test small changes incrementally. In terms of the aims or purpose, describe the aims or purpose, including the specific ambulatory care setting to be targeted. So again, you may focus on telehealth. The section is fundamental for funding. If the aims or purpose are unclear or poorly written, the reviewer may stop reading and reject the application. Try not to make the aims overly complex. Well-written aims are simply stated and written. Using criteria such as Peacock provides a useful framework to help writing the aims. In terms of evidence-based proposals, identify a problem using the Peacock question: patient, intervention, comparison, outcome, and time. In terms of QI proposals, identify a care process or outcome issue. Explain the current state of the baseline metrics. And you may include a process or value streams mapping. This is also known as material information flow mapping. It is also a lean management method for analyzing the current state and designing a future state for the series of events that will take a product or service from the beginning of a specific process until it reaches the end point. And again, this may be relevant to include in your proposal. In terms of evidence, be succinct in summarizing your evidence and the recommendations that come from this process. Try and use evidence that is written within the last 5 years, and if needed, you certainly can include a study that is of classical importance and indicate that. Make sure to describe the internal or external evidence used to inform the initiative, including how the information or evidence was gathered. And again, please use headers that identify the internal or external evidence that was gathered to clearly identify these areas and that they have been addressed. In terms of proposed change in management, make sure to address why this practice proposed change is important and what gaps this proposal will address. And again, to recap, for evidence-based practice proposal, make sure you include your rationale and any reliability and validity measures related to tools or instruments utilized. And for QI proposals, again, please make sure to explain any measures or processes used. And again, the same criteria, please include reliability and validity. Ask yourself if the outcomes are adequately described, defined, and specified. Provide rationale as to why the selected methods were chosen. So for example, quantitative versus qualitative methods. Qualitative could include feedback from focus groups or open-ended questionnaires from staff, clinical leaders, and/or charge nurses are some examples. In terms of quantitative measures, examples could include pre- and post-test methodology and results, various statistical tests to summarize outcome measures, and again, looking at ambulatory nurse-sensitive indicators. Provide a breakdown of the key tasks to be completed. And I've given an example on the PowerPoint slide of a Gantt chart. That's my preference. It helps me stay on track, and I think it's an easy visual for reviewers to follow. And make sure you indicate the anticipated duration, which is clearly identified on the Gantt chart. And this will assure reviewers that all aspects of the proposal have been well thought out. In terms of dissemination, this can include a presentation or verbal or written executive summary to stakeholders and/or to the practice side, the organizational leadership. and an oral presentation to the public, maybe a grand rounds presentation or just some examples. Remember, one of the requirements of funding investigators is to submit an abstract to the National AAACN conference. Poster or podium proposals are acceptable. We also highly encourage you to disseminate your findings through scholarly publications. In terms of budget, again, to recap the excellent information that was provided earlier, you will need to address the budget form, and this includes personnel requests, supplies, equipment, software, cost of dissemination, of which 10% of the funds may be used for this. And you can include any indirect costs such as office space, utilities, electric, are some examples. Here's a slide for our references. And I believe we're at the QI.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Moss and Dr. Hurlbut. We do have our first question. So again, I'm Margot Halm, AAACN nurse scientist. So I've been monitoring the chat. If you have other questions, feel free to get those in the chat. But let's start off with the first question. Katie is asking for EBP proposals. What would be considered an appropriate description of the EBP model that is used? Is the expectation to describe the model in depth or just to discuss how the model fits the project?
Yeah, I think both are appropriate. I would certainly explain the model for the proposal reviewer if they're not familiar. I don't think this needs to be, pages of explanation, but an overview. So I think both of those approaches are, certainly applicable for your proposal that you will submit.
Okay, are there other questions? That was the only question in the chat. And you can feel free to come off your microphone too. Don't be shy. This is really designed to help you get all the information that you need to write a successful grant proposal.
In response to the question that was asked about EBP and the models and for QI, I did find, and I think I mentioned this when I was speaking, there are actually several excellent references within the literature when I did a search explaining the various models and their usage. So I think you'll probably find that information readily available.
Great. Other questions? Again, you can come off mic or you can type your question in the chat. Looks like we have 28 participants. So thrilled that we have such a great turnout today. Any other questions?
Well, I have to say, I'm excited to read everyone's proposal based on participation or be involved and see what future research and initiatives come from this.
Yes, absolutely. So again, the deadline is October 1st, so we still have some time. Looks like we have another question from Ariel. I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong, Ari. Is pilot testing a QI project considered a research or a QI? Great question.
Well, I'll give that a stab. I think that's an excellent question. I think how you could approach it, I think it could be either or. I guess I lean towards a research initiative, pilot testing. That's what I'm familiar with. My other participants, comments from you all.
I think it probably depends on the context of the question. If you're pilot testing some type of a practice change based on strong evidence, it could be a quality improvement project. So I think it really depends on the context of the problem that you're trying to address.
Yeah, agreed. It really is. It's also about if your focus is on research and identifying any gaps in previous knowledge, or a quality improvement aspect of work that you're trying to work on for your project.
Other questions?
I have a question. I have an office who created a project through our community funding team, and it was isolated to their office. It is a QI project because as nurses, I think they just did it without, coming to the educators or the research team to find out kind of what they had to do to make it research. But they are looking at getting published now, but it is going to the state at a state level because of different bills that are being created, and they're looking at legislative dollars. But our health system is in Delaware and Pennsylvania, so I'm curious if they have Pennsylvania legislative dollars, could they still apply for a grant to help their Delaware offices? Is that double dipping? Is it?
Do one of you want to take that, or you want me to comment?
Dr. Ham, if you could take that. I think it's very different, probably based on your state as well,
Yeah.
and the funding priorities of the other organizations.
As far as the AAACN grant dollars on the budget form, we have, and in the application instruction, we have it outlined that if you have dual funding, that you need to be very clear what the other funding source is paying for. But if I understand you correctly, the one state would have legislative dollars. So you would be applying to use AAACN dollars for the state that does not. So
Correct.
From that perspective, I think it would be fine, but you may want to kind of explain that a little bit in the background and make it clear that the dollars are not being used for the other state where the model is also being used.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Nicole asked to reshare the AAACN goals and objectives. Nicole put the links in the chat. Would you like for us to show the slides again, or did that work for you?
That works for me. Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
There is also another informational webinar that Dr. Kristen Scheer and I recorded about a month ago. It is on the research page of the AAACN website that goes into a little bit more detail of how the research priorities were derived. So it's maybe a 20 minutes webinar. If you didn't know that that resource was available, you might want to listen to that as well. Any other questions?
Are there any questions related to the research piece of the presentation, or any questions in general?
I have another question. I think for me, I've seen the communication come out about the grant resources, and I think somebody kind of alluded to it. It's like we do stuff all the time that just for operational improvement and enhancement. So any, I guess, not a question, but more of like advice on us reflecting on something that we could kind of submit as a proposal, whether it's for QI and research that maybe we don't even realize we're already beginning to work on as a project. Because I think I tend to want to have this like big complicated thing, but it really doesn't need to be that complicated. It can be simple. So I was just curious if any of you had any advice or thoughts around just getting started, I guess.
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. I haven't seen any apps, and I'm sure somebody's created one. Like you, I'm interested in finding a way that we could take all of the work that we're already doing so that it can be structured, so that when we're ready to develop a project, be it research, EBP, PI, it's kind of already situated. So my recommendation to that would be to just kind of get started. Maybe you could use an Excel spreadsheet and create the spreadsheet in a way that all of the work that you do on a regular basis, just categorize it based on if it's research, if it's EBP, if it's performance improvement, and start asking yourself questions, preemptively about, what do I want to do with this information? Do I want to just keep it in the organization, or do I want to disseminate widely? And just kind of create your own methodology as you go along to structure the work that you're doing, so that when you make the decision to develop it into something more as a research or EBP or PI project, it'll kind of already be situated. That would be my recommendation.
I would also encourage, I know what has helped me, because you're so right on the money, that there's things we're involved in, and then we reflect and think, wow, I could have really parlayed that into a research project or evidence-based proposal. I would encourage you to talk with your colleagues of like interest. I know that's what's helped me, the meeting of the minds, 3 or 4 of us get involved, and really use what Dr. Moss said too, checklist, or, what's involved, what are the key components of each of the, for example, EBP or research proposal. But really pull your colleagues in, because I find that we really, kind of stimulate the conversation and begin to look at the possibilities. We've been doing this. How could we get funding for this, really to take it to the next level? So I would encourage you also to have that dialogue. And if you have an expert that you can sound this off on, more the better.
Thank you. Those are really great tips.
Okay, it looks like we have another question from Katie. Is the expectation to have IRB approval or determination prior to submission or after the grant is awarded?
So I'll say for, as I mentioned in the research aspect of it, you want to make sure that you've gone down the journey of our IRB approval if it's necessary. And by the time you submit your grant application, your IRB final determination may not be back, but you want to have already started that journey and include that in your proposal.
And just to add on to that, if you are funded, your grant monies will not be released until you supply us with the IRB or the determination letter. And I think there is a window of 90 days. So you have 90 days after notification to obtain that. Other thoughts or questions? Okay, well, if there are no further questions, I think we're at the close of our webinar, and Nikki is putting in a reminder. Thank you for attending. Again, the deadline is October 1st, and feel free to contact the national office. You can certainly contact me at my email there. I know Dr. Moss and Dr. Hurlbut would also be happy to entertain any specific questions related to research, EBP, or QI. I believe that are your emails on the first slide or on the final slide? You want to maybe drop your emails into the chat? So we're all resources for you. And Melissa is asking if the webinar will be sent. So I believe, Nikki, how does that happen?
Keep an eye out in the open forum, because we'll put it there when it is available in the online library. Yep.
Great.
we'll have it available.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We look forward to
great
receiving
question.
your proposals.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.